So, hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. Today we have Priya Mohan on the show. Priya has been an entrepreneur for the last 8 years. In 2012, she co founded Vidyartha, which is an edtech platform which she then successfully exited to Byju's. Prior to that, she spent about 9 years in the investment banking phase. Currently, she's a part of the leadership team at Venture Highway, which is an early stage tech focused venture capital fund. Priya, such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise, Sunil, it's great to be on the show.
Awesome. So Priya, you started in the investment banking space and then you ran a tech platform for about 8 years and you sold that to Byju's, which is a decacorn now. So how has been your experience throughout your journey with SaaS ecosystem, particularly in India?
So I think, Sunil, I'm going to take the liberty to split this question into two. I mean, the answer for this question into two parts. The
Mm-hmm.
first, I'll probably cover my own experience. Actually, SaaS, introduction to SaaS as both from an ecosystem perspective as well as from a business model perspective happened fairly, here and there during my journey as a founder. But
Mm-hmm.
then, obviously a lot more introduction and a lot more awareness happened in the last few years of my time with Baiju. And of course, when I sort of exited and I'm now part of the VC ecosystem. But to just give you a very quick answer to your question as to how has been my experience, see, I think it's good to say that my life has been very, very fortunately accidental. And I say that thoughtfully because, everything has happened in my life, which is being at the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I come from Madras, born and brought up there. And, I actually trained to be a Bharatanatyam dancer. For the longest time, I thought I'll be a professional dancer, but then I realized very quickly you can't make money out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was not the best. So I said, okay, fine, let's move to something else which is better remunerative.
Mm-hmm.
And because of my passion towards doing Bharatanatyam, and I also wanted to be a journalist, and I was like literally a beat reporter even in school. I
Mm-hmm.
decided to abandon science to take commerce, which was literally blasphemous given the
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem and society I came from. And that's when I got into CA because my dad was a CA, and I realized that it was the most respectable next best thing to do, to
Mm-hmm.
prove to people that you're reasonably smart and you're not really one of those
Mm-hmm.
poor in studies within quotes that people
Mm-hmm.
would very often say in the Chennai circles. But post this, post doing my CA, I realized very quickly that's not reflective of my personality, which is I was very curious about businesses. I wanted to understand what's happening at the shop floors rather than doing the bank reconciliation statement. So
Mm-hmm.
I moved jobs, which actually gave me an opportunity to witness wealth creation, either as an executive assistant to a founder in a large chain, and I moved to Delhi, and then from there to Ernst and Young, where I was part of the transaction advisory services, and then back to Chennai because then my fiance then and my husband now was also a first generation entrepreneur who was having a manufacturing outlet in Chennai. So the whole genesis of me starting a company was because I was tied to Chennai, and I said, look, the only way I can break this geographical barrier when I saw all my batchmates
Mm-hmm.
flying high in different fields is, that I started something of my own. So in the meantime, I had also graduated from ISB, passed out of it in 2007. So genesis of Vidyartha was pretty much started with my life story, which is why did I do what I did? And if I'd had a little more guidance, if I'd had a little more data points, would I have still chosen to do a CA? Would my life have gone in a different direction? Can I
Mm-hmm.
marry my passion to what I'm doing? So that's the genesis. To cut the long story short, we work with K-12 students. We built a very, very rigorous rule engine first, and then later, very solid algorithm based platform, which helped K-12 students, very board specific, discover their aptitudes and their interests and marry the whole thing and to create a consolidated learning platform
Mm-hmm.
or a learning kind of a scale. And then on top of that, we curated services and products which were relevant to each kid's
Mm-hmm.
needs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was very, very tactical. So it was not like 100 feet level where we said, okay, you can become an aeronautical engineer and forget about it, right? To breaking it down to 11th grade, what are you going to take? PCMB, PCB. So how should you go? And what are the possible undergraduate, postgraduate options? Scaled it
Mm-hmm.
to 3,000 plus schools. We worked with the CBSC. And that's when we, again, being at the right place at the right time, got introduced to Baiju's. And literally the deal happened in 3 days of meeting him. And Obviously he was a visionary, and it was so inspiring to even hear his story then. He was a fantastic and continues to be a fantastic storyteller. In 2 years, part of Byju's built the B2B2C segment, and we looked at about 19 regions entirely in tier 2 towns. That was a completely different learning for me, because as a founder you're automatically bootstrapped and you're constantly optimizing for capital and bandwidth, but it's a different challenge when you have to solve for scale and customer retention and quality, assuming capital is not a constraint. So that was a very, very
Mm-hmm.
different learning at Byju's. It was during this period, the last 2 years, that one of my closest friends from Chennai, and finally Vinod moved to the US. He ran a SaaS company called Cloud Cherry, and
Right.
which was later sold to Cisco.
Yeah.
Vinod and I go back 15 years, right? Like, we've known each other from when we were, just in our 20s. And, when he started Cloud Cherry and I was running Vidyartha, there were many weekends when we would just get together over a beer, just sharing our agony, right? And, the times of making payroll. And that's when you connect, right? You connect when you
Yeah.
are going through shit together. And that was my first introduction to SaaS. and
Mm-hmm.
and I remember the first time Vinod invited me to speak to his team, as part of he used to get people from different fields to come and inspire and talk to his team. And actually that's when I really got to know what he was doing, and I understood the SaaS business model. Of course, I was aware that people sold to B2B, but a little more nuanced way. And then I've obviously plotted him through his journey as he has mine. And then that's
Mm-hmm.
my first introduction to SaaS. And then post leaving Byju's, through my ecosystem, whether it's Vinod or, when I was thinking about what to do next, and obviously I have a few friends in the VC, including my batchmates, I got a little more knowledge about the SaaS ecosystem. And, you would know this better, Sunil, because you track this ecosystem far
Mm-hmm.
longer and far more deeper than I do, because you're obviously part of it. I think I also can safely say that there's what a journey and what a difference for the SaaS ecosystem from, say, a 2010, 2011 to what it
Right.
is today, 2020. It's like literally a complete metamorphosis. It's like a beginning of a new era, especially in
Totally.
India, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both from an investor perspective, from the kind of business models coming out, from the kind of founder talent it is attracting. It's been an
Mm-hmm.
amazing, transformation, at least as a third party independent observer. And then post joining Venture Highway, I had this incredible opportunity. Obviously, the platform gives you an opportunity to learn so much from vicariously from multiple startups that you're engaging with, and giving, capital to partnering with them, and obviously sitting on their boards. So, couple of startups which are SaaS startups, I work closely with the founders. One being Wingman, which is run by Shruti, who's a very Shruti Kapoor.
Yep.
She's also a YC alumni. Again, a very prolific speaker within the SaaS ecosystem, amazing founder. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, a later stage company called Better Place. And Wingman, of course, sells to the US, whereas Better Place, which is an HRMS enterprise tech, plus, on top of which they're trying to build a PaaS platform, which is focused on the blue collared ecosystem. Much more mature company, again, solid founders, but that's focused on India. These are
Totally.
two examples of companies that I can actually disclose. Some of the others are in stealth. But
Yeah.
between these two, I think I had the opportunity to get a diverse flavor of SaaS India, outbound SaaS, and SaaS for India.
Completely, interesting journey that you've had, Priya, and a lot of serendipities, I would say.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, and I think Shruti was from Wingman. She was on the show previously in one of the episodes, and I think she helped us connect. So,
Yeah, yeah.
really, really great. I've been closely following Wingman's journey as well, and they're doing really an interesting job in the US ecosystem. Truly wonderful. So, speaking about these two examples that you picked, right? Better Place, which is a SaaS who's primarily focusing only in India, right? Versus
Yeah,
Wingman, which is based in India and a YC alumni, and their primary market is in the US, right?
yeah,
So when you were dealing with these two companies, right? So one is a global SaaS company which is based in India selling outside India. One is an Indian SaaS company which is based in India and trying to sell in India. So what are the differences that you experienced when you're talking to the founders of these two different companies, in terms of scaling up or in terms of growth or in terms of, selling in these two different areas?
So honestly, Sunil, I have to put a caveat here, as you would appreciate. These
Mm-hmm.
two companies, while, they're both SaaS, they're at very different stages of their business, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
Man is
completely.
a very early stage, Better Place. But couple of points I've understood, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
the ability, even before, right, say 3 4 years ago, and I think among the VCs, Axel is probably a very prolific SaaS investor. I mean, they've built a very robust, kind of, and been part of a robust SaaS ecosystem among its own investments. But if you
Totally.
generally look at what I've observed is the ability of a SaaS company selling to India to attract capital compared to a SaaS company selling to the US. It's
Mm-hmm.
always been more about SaaS companies selling to the US, because the biggest challenge, say
Mm-hmm.
5 6 years ago, is that SaaS companies selling in India, the biggest concern was monetization, conversion cycles. Will people pay for SaaS? The long paid pilots. And literally, there will be, you can count in handful, right? If you took any kind of SaaS across different verticals, there'll be the top four or top five companies. And then, how do you then think of the TAM? Can this company really grow? So on and
Totally.
so forth, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
ability to attract capital for some of these companies has been a huge challenge. But of course, that's entirely shifting today. And part of the reason, according to me, is because the infrastructure, the base layer, and the general attitude of consumers of SaaS, even Indian companies consuming SaaS, has completely changed. Of course, the regular cliched reasons of digitization and more tech infrastructure. If you look at any traditional company, the spends towards technology infrastructure, cloud infrastructure is probably a lot compared to what it was even 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also the attitude changed, right? Like, which is, a lot of ROI questions, right? That's why I would remember my friends who ran SaaS companies would say, boss, it's so easy to sell to the US. When they understand value, they are willing to pay. Whereas in India, we're a bargain market, right?
Mm-hmm.
They will not pay. I think that's also changing, because today what people are realizing is they don't want to reinvent the wheel for everything. They
Totally.
understand experts, and if there is a way that they can quickly integrate solutions, and which increases their either their own productivity and or makes an impact either at the cost reduction level or a revenue enhancement level, I think people are far more amenable to integrate such products and solutions rather than what they were doing a couple of years ago. Now, contrast this to in companies which are the India US outbound companies. I think
Mm-hmm.
there was a reasonable comfort because of the obvious cost arbitrage and the
Mm-hmm.
availability of tech talent in India, right? So that
Totally.
entire thesis, of course, the pioneers being, Fresh Desk and, Kadim of Whatfix and, all of these guys, they were able to establish that, hey, we can build solid, tech operations, teams in India with services US clients and make it grow. But there again, the difference between, the enterprise customers and the SMBs. And I think as capital went to some of these companies and the business models evolved, I think it gave a lot more comfort to the rest of the ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I think the India US outbound SaaS has become a far more, I would say, at least from a capital attraction perspective, it's become again, everybody is looking at it. And
Mm-hmm.
post COVID, right, I think the spotlight and on SaaS today is so high compared to it any time before, right?
Right.
The multiples of SaaS companies in the US, right, is trading like crazy. And if you've read the latest, Gong investment by Sequoia, right,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's just right, because at the end of the day, from an investor perspective, and when I just joined this ecosystem, I would always wonder what makes investments tick, right? What is the
Mm-hmm.
way investors are thinking? Why do some investors over index on B2C? And the
Right.
biggest thing I have understood is that B2C, the hockey stick or the expected hockey stick, right? Even if the
Mm-hmm.
probability is low, the ability to give very large outcomes
Mm-hmm.
was always, I was told and I was observing, was far higher than in the SaaS. But I think that's also changing with the
Right.
number of acquisitions happening, and possibly with the number of public markets, public IPOs that are likely to happen, right?
Totally.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think both these have come to an even keel, which is great for the SaaS ecosystem.
Completely. And I think in talking about particularly the Indian SaaS ecosystem, right? I think COVID has given a lot of companies a level playing field where a lot of companies are emerging due to this pandemic which is happening, or which is
Absolutely.
affecting all over the world, right? You would
Absolutely.
see companies like Airmeet, which is event platform, which was definitely needful in a time like these when everything is moving virtual, your physical events are cancelled, and all the companies like we at Whatfix, we do a lot of physical events, and we were looking for a platform when we wanted to do like a virtual event. And then we saw that not only Airmeet, but there are various platforms like Zadal also is recent YC alumni, and they're also an event management platform based out of India. And there are many more, right? There are many more which has come out due to this pandemic. And if you go back to the 2008 crash, right, like not just the pandemic, but that was a big crash as well. And if you see like companies like Airtable, companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb, though not SaaS, but then started after the 2008 crash. So do you think like this pandemic has given a level playing field for many SaaS companies, and then a lot of them would emerge in India who would then be in the future have successful exit? But what are your thoughts on this particularly, like pandemic affecting the Indian SaaS ecosystem?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think I'll split it into three, four parts.
That's a
Okay. I
big
think the
one, yeah.
first part, you talked about Airmeet, right? And
Hmm.
I think, look, Airmeet from a business model perspective, there's tailwinds. And
Hmm.
actually, that's a tailwind based kind of a boost, right? There are a
Yep.
couple of B2C companies also which had tailwinds, right?
Hmm.
And these tailwinds are like, actually it's across board, right? It completely depends on business to business. So for example, social commerce has taken off big time. Actually, commerce also has taken off big time because as number of shoppers who are not going to retail stores, right, today they're very comfortable shopping digitally, right, in
Totally. Yeah.
certain areas. So similarly, from an events perspective, obviously COVID induced travel bans and all of that. And it's amazing because I can almost see, I do, although I'm still more traditional at heart, I do believe in the value of face to face meeting. But even
Hmm.
me today, if I were to, I mean, even post COVID, right, I would completely optimize my meetings, right? And I'll probably
Right.
do 50% of what I was doing in face to face, right? So
Yeah.
that way, Airmeet has, obviously got, the tailwinds, induced by COVID. But
Hmm.
let's leave the tailwinds aside, because when you look at tailwinds, it's probably there are some industries both in SaaS and non-SaaS. But I'll come up to certain other points and would love your views as well on this, which
Hmm.
is, I think, monetization, right? And why I've given a thought to this. Why has the spotlight gone on SaaS companies more, right? And why, of course, there are the companies like the Airmeets of the world and the Gongs of the world who have probably really taken advantage of the tailwinds. But at a
Uh-huh.
fundamental level, from a business model, we all know that a B2C is a little more capital intensive than
Hmm.
compared to a traditional or a SaaS business, right? So and if you see a lot of the B2C companies, it's been very very, the kind of number of rounds it's raised, and obviously the biggest lesson for most of us in the COVID thing is monetization has gone either ways depending on the business model, right?
Hmm.
And some have recovered, some are yet to recover, some have completely lost it because for no fault of theirs, because the entire this is a tectonic shift, right? But if
Right.
you look at a SaaS business, right, it's, I don't think, very few SaaS businesses are as, when you do a comparison, apples
Hmm.
to apples comparison, the kind of capital efficiency that you can do in a SaaS business, right, is
Hmm.
is a little higher than perhaps in a B2C kind of a business, right? And also, especially, the second part is, about the monetization, right? Like many of these SaaS businesses, and you must be knowing Prasanna of Upeka, right? And he's
Yeah.
a big, he's a good friend. And I learned a lot from him about the SaaS ecosystem. And one of the things he would tell me is, look, the best way to test the model is to see if these guys are making money, right? And
Yeah.
that is your evidence of ROI. And
Hmm.
in a SaaS business, that is from literally day one. Now, when I say
Hmm.
day one, it could be whenever the product market fit is achieved and when you get your first customer. I think the visibility, the ability to monetize, of course there are nuances between the enterprise SaaS and the SMB SaaS and the whole distribution angle in SMB SaaS. But having said that, I think the visibility, the monetization, and a little more, I would say, a business model that can be fairly comparatively more easily predicted than perhaps some of these large B2C businesses where,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a while to monetize. I think,
Totally.
right? And COVID has put spotlight on capital efficiency. Some of the
Yeah.
best founders I've worked with, have taken very, very, very sharp, very, very assertive decisions on preserving capital and extending runway, right?
Right.
And that's when, for the first time after a long time, you start questioning, the kind of capital that has gone into some of these businesses,
Mm-hmm.
and what is truly capital efficiency. I think that's another thing COVID has really put a spotlight on.
Totally. It has given, I think, many companies to think on, what they think as capital and where they should invest and what's like real, usefulness or in terms of spending my budget and what will decrease my runway and what will increase my runway. I think this was a lesson that a lot of founders would have got due to COVID on effectively managing the capital. I think this was a crash course that they had to learn because no one could predict in the start of the year that we are going to be facing something like this
Absolutely.
across the world. And
Well said.
yeah,
And the resilience of, at the end of the day, I have to take this moment to tell you this,
yeah,
Sunil. I think I consider myself extremely lucky that I'm not, I don't know how I would have reacted because, of course, as a founder itself, you go through such highs and lows.
totally,
But the
yeah.
resilience and I think a few founders, their ability to take incisive decisions, be
Hmm.
very objective about things, and,
Yep,
the kind of decisions very quickly without being nudged. I mean, it just is amazing, right?
yep.
Some of them have really outshone in this pandemic.
Totally. And thanks to, and I would say thanks to a lot of people who have made themselves accessible during the time when, a lot of founders or a lot of first time founders would need help, right? Because no one would have predicted this, yes. But then even if you are facing a roadblock, I saw like many VC firms and many founders who were, being helpful out on LinkedIn, who were posting that, I'm up for a call, or I have myself connected a lot of founders with the VCs or fellow founders who have faced and came across these roadblocks and overcame these roadblocks. So I think the help that has been provided or that has been accessible in the Indian SaaS market is truly amazing, and I think it's just starting out, and it's definitely going to grow, and it's just this beginning of the revolution which was long pending, I would say, in the Indian market for SaaS.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I've always been envious of the SAS family, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think, and I, obviously I've seen that with, with firsthand with Prasanna or Vinod or even the kind of people, the whole, Girish Mathrubudam or Kadim or all of, I think it's like a family, right? And they really truly understand each other. And I think SAS has done a brilliant job. The SAS community has done, especially if you go to Chennai, it's almost like the SAS Mecca,
Mhm.
right, of India.
Yeah.
And they've done a brilliant job of helping each other. In fact, Upeka, for example, their model where he's truly building a community, right? Like where
Yep.
it's not just optimizing for your own, but if there's anything that you can do to help the entire community, that's great. And he's focusing on sustainable business, right? Which is,
Yep.
growth is great, but let's build a solid business model today. I think that's amazing, and you're absolutely right. I think what has happened with during the pandemic is that there's a very, very evidently vulnerable and human side of everybody that's come out, right? And
Mhm.
it doesn't matter, it could be like whether even the way VCs thought about the I mean, ultimately it's a business model for us as well as it is for the founders. But supporting founders or not just being accessible, giving not just the connections but even taking calls on certain bridges that they may have to do, or supporting
Right.
founders when because this is a force major event that none of us anticipated. So I think that's another amazing thing that happened in the ecosystem.
Totally. And I think we have reached the time for this episode. So let's quickly move on to the lightning round, and let's continue the insightful discussion that we have. So I have like three lightning questions for you. So the first one. So what do you know about your work now that you wish you would have known when you first started?
Hmm. It's a very interesting. uh,
It makes you think.
Absolutely. I think I'll sum it up in one line.
Uh-huh.
Just because you know to ride a horse and you become a great jockey does not give you the automatic talent to be the best picker of a horse. What it
Interesting.
translates to, just
Hmm.
because I have some operating experience
Right.
does not automatically make me a great VC. Of course, the connect with the founders and everything is
Yeah.
there, but it's a very, very unique talent and a very different type of skills that you need to hone
Mm-hmm.
to make some of the best picks, especially in industry as VC where it's the highest risk class, asset class,
Mm-hmm.
and the probability of success is so low, right?
Totally.
So that's the biggest lesson I learned.
Great. I think you should, we as humans should always keep learning, and there's always new things that keeps coming, right? So you should always keep your eyes and ears wide open. Great. So second one, like, what did your biggest professional failure teach you?
There are so many where I think one of the biggest lessons is I mean, I read a lot on, I think 80% of business and everything is behavioral psychology, right? Like I think
Hmm.
I sincerely believe that discipline is very, very, it's given a lot less of a podium focus than it should be.
Right.
In that I think as you grow older and as you sort of start wearing your scars, I think the biggest lesson is nobody's intention is to screw you.
Hmm.
Everybody's first intention is to self preserve. When you
Yeah,
come with that knowledge to a negotiation or a discussion, it changes the perspective of how you deal with the person in the opposite side of the table.
makes sense. Really interesting to know. This is a different perspective, definitely. So yeah, third one. So what's the number one thing that has helped you shorten your learning curve?
I think books, I've always been a voracious reader.
Hmm.
I would say two things, two pillars, people and books. I have a set of few friends who I, shamelessly keep bugging for insights and inspiration.
Hmm.
And, I'm very privileged. I think that's the advantage of, again, very fortunate to be in the space and the time that I'm in. I have few people who truly inspire me. And obviously it's like, taking constant nuggets of wisdom from them. And secondly, I mean, I'm just amazed at the amount of knowledge out there, right? So, and the more I read, the more honestly I feel more ignorant. But
Yeah.
the thing what I've realized is at some time it compounds, right? At some time, this kind of constant accumulation, and I won't even get into what type and what kind, but it just accumulates that at some level it makes you start building and enhancing your mental models, right?
Hmm. Got
And
it.
your frameworks, right? And I think that's the key to this job, at least, right? What makes every investor unique is his own rubric and his own frameworks for investment. And I think that's where I aspire to be able to build my own building blocks and my own
Hmm.
rubrics and frameworks. And I think this kind of knowledge helps you do second order thinking, making multiple connections which are not hitherto, what do you say, it shows easily, right? So your ability to connect multiple dots, I think that's what I aspire to be. But having said that, I also feel there are days I wake up with an existential question, which is like you just read more and then you realize how less you know.
Yeah. That's the, I think we're similar in that way, like, two things, which is people and reading.
Yeah.
Really wonderful. So thanks a lot, Priya. I think this has been a really insightful episode, and really great things came out of this discussion. So thanks a lot for your time, and thanks a lot for coming and sharing those insights with us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Sunil, for having me. I think I still have a lot to learn about the SaaS ecosystem, but if I were to just leave with one thing, I remember you asked me what is the difference. I think
Yeah.
one of the things, I think the time and space and the kind of people and the kind of SaaS companies that have come out of India, I
Hmm.
think one thing I've observed, and I'd like to leave that as a last parting thought,
Yeah.
is that I think as culturally, we are people who probably don't package ourselves as well as probably people in the West. And
Hmm.
here, sometimes our products outshine, but still our packaging and our ability to put ourselves out there is a little different and probably understated compared to the West, where it's more like a marketing first kind of an approach. And I think if we get that little bit of skill, I think we can build some really, really interesting companies and scale globally as we are already.
Totally. I think it's just the start for us. So many more successes and many more milestones to come out of Indian SaaS ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining in and really wonderful to connect with you and have you on the show.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you so much.